Hello and welcome to my community. An equally warm welcome to our viewers around the world, those of you who continue to follow us weekly via the World Wide Web. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. As always, I'm pleased that you have joined us. Last week we looked back at the events associated with the Cubana crash, and we introduced you to a Barbadian lady who fortunately missed that flight. This week we return to the mini-series on the High Altitude Research Project. Our first episode ended with Ivan Burke on the trail of the HARP gun, that route that was used to transport the gun from right here in Foul Bay to what has become its resting place at Paragon. This week, historian Trevor Marshall picks up the discussion from that point. You will get a sense of why the site at Paragon was chosen, its location in relation to other land masses, and something of the technical aspect of the operation.
So Paragon becomes the final resting place, and we mean that in every sense of the term, because the guns are still there. So Paragon becomes the point at which these two guns are brought to rest, and the Gerald Bull ionospheric exercise can now be launched. Barbados is approximately 150 miles to the east of the Caribbean. Our nearest neighbors being St. Vincent to the southwest, off the coast of St. James, 100 miles away, and St. Lucia to the northwest, off the coast of St. Lucie. All right? We make this point because the projectiles, the shooting exercise took place in a part of this region, which we must say is the Caribbean, for sake of neighborliness. Politically, geopolitically, administratively, in terms of everything to do with Britain, Barbados was part of the Caribbean. But it was that island which lay outside the archipelago, that necklace of islands, and therefore you could shoot your projectiles to the southwest and nobody would be hurt in that direction behind you. You could shoot them to the southeast, to your right. And when you went southeast, another 3,700 miles would take you to Africa, since Barbados is the island closest to Africa. So for these reasons, Barbados was like the Virgin Mary, highly favored and blessed. Barbados was the space from which these projectiles could be shot or released without damage to shipping in the area, without damage to any other islands, and the damage would only be in this 166 square miles called Barbados. Now that exercise took probably 6 weeks to set up. Not only did you have the two massive guns to put in place, and they were put in place under the brow of the hill, as you will see, away from the road at Rock Hall being your closest point of access to it, Rock Hall St. Philip, that is. But there were all subsidiary and ancillary bits of weaponry and bits of machinery, and indeed huts, temporary, and other emplacements to be put there. So it took 6 weeks for the entire operation to be set up. It was overseen by Dr. Gerald Bull himself, and Mr. Errol Barrow, on one famous occasion, went there to visit, and he took along with him Mr. Carlton Brathwaite.
Over to the island's first Prime Minister, the Honorable Errol Barrow. In another part of the island, the HARP project on space research may yet illuminate the scientific horizons of the world. Making his acceptance speech at the United Nations, the Prime Minister said of his people,
They could best sum up their attitude at this moment of their history in the words of Mr. Valiant for Truth, an interesting character in John Bunyan's famous book. Though with much difficulty I have come hither, yet I do not repent me of the trouble I have taken. Now that is the beginning of a new chapter in Barbados. Not just in the development of the ionospheric investigations or the Machiavellian practices of Dr. Gerald Bull, who's trying to find out how effectively you can shoot projectiles and land them at a particular point.
The technology behind that was to, to see if it's possible to shoot anything through a gun and that survives the amount of G's caused by the firing. So you're sending very sensible electronics in the sky. And the first electronics they sent were actually measuring winds.
Then we will be starting in, we hope in April, in a series of firings of upper atmospheric study. We will be putting up some smoke trails to study upper atmosphere winds.
So that's why the first part of the study, when they start shooting, was weather studies. Because at the time we had to send balloons. At the time, I don't know if you remember that, you put the balloon and then you look at the wind, the way they move and so forth. And then with the rockets, it was possible then to study up to the stratosphere because it was shooting at 60 miles. And therefore you could see the wind direction and then you can measure it. So you had instruments here recording all what the rocket was measuring. And you must imagine if you're going to be shooting a rocket at 40 Gs of pressure, what kind of electronic you have to build. So this team of university professors and students developed a way to put the electronic into epoxy. So it could withstand any amount of Gs. So that's how it came to. So it started with weather station, with weather measurements, and then it became the study to send a satellite.
Interestingly enough, the Canadian government was of a different view as it related to the operations of the program. In fact, Dr. Philip Bull, the son of Dr. Gerald Bull, tells us of their interest. The recurring question remains the same. Why was Barbados interested?
At the time, Canada was not really interested in that technology, so therefore it only, I think my father was forced actually to work with the American military, and therefore a lot of that technology went into military knowledge afterwards.
So the guns were placed at Paragon.
There was a 16-inch gun, there were two 5 inches and a 10.
And Barbadians were given a rather generalized warning that within a few weeks, these guns would be firing projectiles.
They used to be at nights. And they would send the people to the hotels, Petty Hole, and they will also stop the fishermen from going out.
And when guns be fired, we will check the area to make sure there's nothing overflying or whatever. And because we had published a NOTAM, and NOTAM simply is a notice to airmen, which you publish these things and all over the world, the information is available. So if you're flying from Timbuktu to Barbados, you will look for the NOTAMs pertaining to Barbados in the area. And it's available there. So you look up Barbados and you'll see, hey, they just published NOTAM 30 minutes ago. There's a gun out there. So we know that if you fly over there, we can't fly over there between at a certain time. So the aircraft will either plan its route or ask permission if they want that they can fly over, and then we may delay if we can.
It is Monday, January the 21st, 1963. Then Premier Errol Barrow is celebrating his 43rd birthday. It is the day the first projectile will be ejected from the gun barrel here at the Paragon site. every precaution is taken to prevent accidents. And in the control room, these are very tense moments for Dr. Gerald Bull. The years of speculations, trials, and errors would soon be put to the test. Will the projectiles stand up as they did during the test in the laboratory? Will the maximum range be attained?
That maximum range was attained through a friend of mine. His name was Douglas Melzer. His job was to make the propellant. And this was made just like how you would make dough to make bread. It was amazing, but that's what he did, and that was his specialty.
Was the series B needlessly accelerated? A Martlet 1B after only one slug instead of 3. The gun would have to hold after...
Here is a heart control, single control tower. Here is a map forecast for the area. Wind 09015 knots, gusting to 25 knots. Visibility 15 nautical miles. 4 octaves of cumulus, stratocumulus. 1,800 feet. 3 octaves of altocumulus.
And we, as our air traffic controllers, had to give the final okay for that gun to be fired because there might be aircraft in flight. So we had to check the area, what we call the flight information region. We would call PRCO, make sure there's nothing in the area. Now, I would say the gun was pointed to the southeast, so you don't have it going point to any other islands or whatever. And for that reason, we had to redesign our command airspace so that we had, yes, an area projecting out towards the southeast. And that is what we controlled during this operation. And the last thing we would do is to push the last button, a switch light, and the chap over during the countdown before the gun was fired, once he sees that green light, he would then be cleared to go.
There's now a careful watch on all aircrafts and ships. The projectiles are expected to travel 7 miles out to sea and spend just about 2 minutes in the air.
We had the first radar brought here. It was brought from New York here. It's an old thing. I mean, it's like a Commodore 64 compared to what we have today. Real old technology, but at least they used it for tracking the missile, because we developed a number of systems. Telemetry, which means that you get information coming back from the satellite to ground, so we can check on heights, temperatures, velocity, all these type of things we would check.
Want it cleared? Want it cleared now?
When firing started, then they took us out. They took us out to Paragon.
The signal was sent to the lighthouses and signal stations around the island. On that day in question, more than 60 international cameras were present to record the first ejection of the projectiles from the gun barrel. Those cameras were filming at a rate of 5,000 frames per second. The gun was elevated to an 80-degree angle, pointing in a southeasterly direction. Spectators and workers quickly rushed away from their point of vantage to take refuge in the bunkers.
But the operations of the guns at Paragon had quite important, severe implications for Barbadians. Because for the next 7 years, and remember, 1963 McGill ceased operations in 1974. So for the better part of a decade, Barbadians in St. Joseph, in St. Thomas, in St. James would hear the sonic boom and would feel the reverberations of the harp gun at this desolate and remote part of Christ Church.
It was very loud. It was very, very loud. Because it used to shake Barbados. I don't know if you heard.
I heard that.
It used to shake all down in St. Andrew and St. Lucie.
I can't remember some of the shit.
Yeah. This was a massive 16-inch gun. I can't remember the elevation, the height of the elevation. And if you look in the Guinness Book of Record, I don't know if it's the new one or the one just before, it has that 16-inch gun in Barbados had the biggest breach in the world. I don't know if you know this. Right. Has the biggest breach.
And it shook the foundations of houses and churches and other buildings in Christ Church, in St. Philip. We in St. John felt the boom, we heard the boom. We looked in the direction of Sewell Airport and we saw nothing, but we knew that this is where that beautiful noise came from.
Beautiful noise. Quite interesting. That beautiful noise reverberated throughout many areas of the island and the vibration caused damage to homes as far as Collymore Rock in St. Michael. What about the daily operations of the site? How was it all done? The work at Paragon. What were some of those jobs that were available on location at the site? You will learn of how the inside of the gun was cleaned and repaired by Barbadian men.
We had machine shops, which was run by Boo Brathwaite and his team, and they were making the rockets. They were making the rockets, and we also had engineer working on the gun and the barrel.
We had to go into the gun after a shoot because it cracks up. Right, the cracks sometimes are about 2 to 3 inches, right, and it's about 1/4 of an inch wide, 2 to 3 inches long. Used to go inside and have a look at the cracks, and they will kind of, of course you know the distance, and you have an idea, you know, where the cracks are. But it's always cracked when they do a shoot, and they'll put you on what you call a creeper. It's a shape, right, and they'll put the rods, screw the rods in. Another rod push you in and push you right up, and you also go in with your lead lamp, which is the pit light, and your welding gear, right? Of course your mask, your gas mask, and you know. And the terrifying thing is that when a spark hit the bulb, there's one great big explosion, and it was very scary. So you had to try and keep the bulb, the shade on the bulb towards, right? But in the meantime, you still had to have enough light to see, to do your welding, you know? And I did that for a while, but then after a few weeks, I got claustrophobic up in that 16-inch. So I decided then, this is not good enough for me. I'm going to get back to the mechanic shop. So I started to put on weight, purposely. Because the inside the bar is only 16 inches. Yeah. And you have to have room to turn, to weld overhead and that kind of thing, eh?
And we had engineers everywhere. And also we had people outside, we had people on boats studying the trajectory. And we had a manned radar system in Trinidad and St. Vincent monitoring the flight.
So the persons, McGill and Gerald Bull, assisted by Mr. Carlton Brathwaite, operating on behalf of the Right Honorable Errol Barrow, they chose wisely and well. For the next 11 years, until McGill divested itself of the exercise and ceased its operations here, Barbados would be associated with the HARP project.
Yes, the High Altitude Research Project. This was, you could say, a dangerous operation. At some points in time, it altered the physical structure of people's properties, including their homes.
And when Barbadians were queried about how they felt about the damage to their infrastructure, to the land, because doubtlessly there must have been some damage.
It's alleged that at one time it misfired and the shell landed somewhere in Kernels.
Because of the propeller, shattered, and it came back and landed in a couple of people's backyard.
On a man donkey pen, he had just moved the donkey. It's alleged. I'm not sure. But they came and they dug it up at night. They never do anything the day for you to see. Even when they landed here, the equipment came off during the night. But I want to emphasize it's alleged that the shot landed somewhere in Curtains.
If you can imagine putting something 90 miles in the air with the explosion, the amount of force that you would need, and the sonic boom that you would also generate. Yes, there was some damage, but there was legislation that was put in place specifically for this HAARP gun, so that unfortunately no one could have got compensated if there was damage.
Most Barbadians unburdened themselves of the opinion that it was all for the good of Barbados. Indeed, Mr. Barrow himself led the chorus of approbation, saying this will place Barbados in the forefront of, he did not say intergalactic, but he said upper atmospheric investigation.
No wonder why the project was brought to an end here in Barbados. Pat Callender was at that time the general manager of the Grantley Adams International Airport. He recalls an expression of interest on the part of another company to establish in Barbados. You will learn of how the project came to an end and, more importantly, who was responsible for bringing it to an end.
We had an approach here by a company that wanted to set up a base here to shoot. They want to do once a month, but they would actually be sending satellites up like how we do in down in South America. We did not go for it because I suppose remember the HAARP gun, but this could have happened in Barbados too. Then there were other things spin-offs. A lot of materials like glues, epoxies and things that can withstand high pressures were developed right here. So a lot of technology was developed here. But then when Prime Minister Adams came along and the project had got into disrepute because all types of rogue governments were trying to get the technology so they can use against their thing. There was a lot of materials left up there. And it was only about a year or so later, there was some work being done over at Paragon. Paragon is now the headquarters for the RS and also for the Defense Force have a unit up there. And they discovered some very dangerous materials, that could have exploded. So I remember very well they sent in a C-130 or whatever, and they had to remove that after the project was finished. Tom Adams decided that he didn't want the project here, and eventually the project went off to Antigua. Part of the project went to Antigua, and the other part was in Quebec, between Vermont and Quebec, on the border.
The mastermind behind the operation here at Paragon was Dr. Gerald Bull, who was assassinated on March the 22nd, 1990, 5 months before the start of the Gulf War. And that assassination occurred outside of his 6th-floor apartment in a fashionable Brussels suburbs. Dr. Bull was known as many things to many people. However, his son, Dr. Philip Bull, regarded him as
a very normal guy. He was not eccentric or crazy or anything else. He was a very normal family father. He had 7 children, came from a big family, and I think he was a very fair man. He was fair to his students. He was fair to his employees. He was somebody which was happy with himself, happy with what he was doing, and it was the nicest time of his life was here. Working here, he had also a very, very close relationship with the Prime Minister at the time, with Errol Barrow. He was, they were always together, always discussing and always thinking. And it was and having a Prime Minister which so supportive for something so new and so because this is the only place in the world at the time where they were shooting.
Yes, it was the only place in the world engaged in such an operation that still remains a mystery to most Barbadians. But it happened right here in Barbados. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. This has been My Community.